Tonight on Reporting Scotland, we're live from the heart of the Scottish Parliament, 10 years to the day since the independence referendum. The First Minister says he believes Scotland is closer than ever to independence, but opponents say people have moved on from the debate. We'll hear live from John Swinney, as well as two other former political leaders on each side about where they think the question sits now.
I fervently wish we'd made more progress, but I remain optimistic.
We've got to make sure that people in Scotland can see the worth of that membership of the United Kingdom.
And we'll be hearing the reflections of some of the voters who took that historic decision a decade ago.
I still think I would vote yes. Every other country has had its chance. Scotland should get its chance as well.
No, it was the right decision. Yeah. Well, you take it now in Dundee. If people come to vote again now, Dundee win the vote. Yes, win.
And in the day's other news,
more tourists, money for the country. Yeah.
I remember the last time, and it was just the buzz about the city.
with the Commonwealth Games coming back to Glasgow, what do people in the city want to see from the event?
And coming up in the sport, it's a big night in the Champions League as Celtic begin their campaign at home to Slovan Bratislava.
I'm Graham Stewart in the Reporting Scotland studio.
And I'm Laura Miller, live from Holyrood for this special edition of the programme. Good evening and welcome to Holyrood. 10 years ago today, the people of Scotland stood on the cusp of a truly historic decision. 16 years after voting to create this very parliament, they were faced with this question: should Scotland become an independent country? It brought politics to the people like never before, ignited a debate, forced us to confront the very notion of what it is to be Scottish. We all know what the outcome was. But a decade on, how has it shaped us, changed us, enriched or degraded political debate? Tonight, in this special programme, we'll ask all of those questions and assess what comes next. But to begin with, our chief political correspondent, Lindsay Buse, reports on the current state of the debate.
The referendum brought unprecedented levels of political debate to Scotland's streets as both sides fought to persuade people of their case. After the votes were cast, the no side won out, and the political fallout was felt immediately.
I think that party, parliament and country would benefit from new leadership.
The 18th of September 2014, a key moment in the nation's history and one that shaped our politics in the decade that followed.
10 years on, with a Labour government in Westminster and the SNP's fortunes on the wane, where does that leave the question of independence?
Today, the First Minister marked the anniversary at an event in Edinburgh.
We're here to reflect on a moment of tremendous significance in Scotland's recent past.
After years spent pushing for agreement from Westminster for a second referendum, he told activists a sustained majority is needed to deliver their goal.
We have quite simply got to build support for independence so it becomes a compelling and demonstrable proposition within Scotland. That is what we have got to do. There is no shortcut. And hear me when I say that. I accept there's no shortcut.
With the SNP losing support at the general election, some argue the push for independence needs to be broader.
Supporting independence, or ultimately voting for independence, is not voting for the SNP. It's not saying who you want to be First Minister or which party's manifesto you want to see implemented. That's what we do at election time. But independence is about giving Scotland the ability to choose a multitude of different paths forward.
During a debate at Holyrood, opposition leaders called for an end to constitutional arguments.
On this, the 10th anniversary of the 2014 independence referendum, my message to John Swinney and the SNP government is this: you lost, get over it and let us all move on.
The truth is, the reason why we made so little progress over the last 10 years is because this SNP government has been leading a campaign, not a government. And they've been trying to hide their failures behind the smokescreen of the Constitution.
But with polling suggesting people are still equally split on the issue, this former No activist says there's still work for unionists to do.
Let's make people see that the United Kingdom can change. I think that you've got to prove it. It's got to be a show and not tell situation, because as soon as people believe that life can be better within Scotland, within the United Kingdom, then they're not going to see independence as a life draft.
Others believe the decision on a second referendum should be taken out of politicians' hands by looking to Northern Ireland, where a border poll will take place if a majority are likely to back reunification.
The great value of the Northern Irish model is that it's exactly focused on majority support for the constitutional change.
Do you think there's any chance that the UK government would agree to draw that up?
The two governments seem to be talking to each other in a much more constructive way. So there are no guarantees, but I would encourage both sides to look to see whether this period is one where a new way forward can be found.
Although there's been a change of government at Westminster, there are no signs there'll be constitutional change for Scotland in the near future. Lindsay Buse, reporting Scotland, Holyrood.
Well, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined now by the First Minister, John Swinney, the man tasked with effectively spearheading the campaign for independence 10 years on. Welcome, Mr Swinney. Thank you very much for your time this evening. This time 10 years ago, independence must have felt like it was within touching distance. But now, does it feel like a more distant prospect to you?
It doesn't, because I think fundamentally people in Scotland remain very strong, those who believe in independence and their support for the concept of independence. I think the challenge, and I've accepted this in the aftermath of the Westminster general election, is that the sense of urgency and priority has got to be inserted into the arguments for independence, and those arguments have got to relate to the concerns that people will have about the issues that are on their minds today, whether that's about the cost of living or about the National Health Service or whatever the issues that people are worried about today. So independence has got to appear as a solution to the challenges and the issues that people face in their lives.
Would a second independence referendum, for instance, become before the Holyrood elections in 2026?
I can't predict exactly what the sequence of events will be, but what my job is to lead the campaign to build support for independence. I think the arguments for independence are strong. They relate to the fact that our country has got to have the power and the capacity to determine our own future. We can do a lot within the devolved government, and we do a lot within the devolved government in Scotland, but there's more we want to do. I'd want to lift children out of poverty tomorrow, and we could take steps with the powers of an independent country to do that, but we're in many ways hemmed in by the powers that we have just now, and we need to have more powers.
Sure, but some supporters of independence would say that you have had 10 years to do this, and even your harshest critics would say that after the independence referendum and in the intervening years, the SNP had real political capital to expend. I'm thinking after the general election in 2015, after Brexit. What would you say to the criticism that you have squandered that?
Well, we collided with a roadblock, which was Westminster intransigence, and Westminster saying no, that's what happened. And what we've got to do, what I've got to do, what my job is to make sure I win more public support for independence, so that it's tangible and emphatic that people in Scotland want our country to be independent. And that's what's at the heart of my thinking. It's what I've told my party we've got to do. We've got to be in a position to win more converts to the concept of independence and to make that their priority, and that's exactly what we're going to do in the period ahead.
But isn't it the case that you talked about the recent general election, that the polls suggest that the support for independence has been pretty constant since 2014, yet support for your party is dipping, not least in that result in the general election. So isn't it the case that people are seeing your record in government and not liking what they're seeing?
I think what the issue that motivated the Westminster election outcome was fundamentally people wanted to get rid of a discredited Conservative government. They were also expressing frustrations about the SNP, and I'm addressing that as leader of the party. I've been very candid about my party, about what we've got to do, what we've got to address, how we've got to overcome some of those perceptions, and fundamentally we've got to work hard to win the trust of the people of Scotland, and that's what I'm devoted to doing. That's what I'm devoted to, serving the people of Scotland and building their trust, and out of that will come support for independence as a consequence of winning the arguments that are necessary so that people see independence as the solution to their day-to-day problems.
I wanted to raise something just that was raised by Nicola Sturgeon. We'll hear from her later in the programme, and some strategists, that People are now, with Inside the Movement, looking towards Ireland and thinking that perhaps the prospect of a united Ireland would happen before an independent Scotland. Is that now the strategy?
I think what will happen is that the United Kingdom is in a pretty poor state of affairs. I think the arguments in the aftermath of Brexit has really damaged the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom has lost its way. And out of that, people within the United Kingdom will decide how they want to be governed. And I hope here in Scotland I can put forward the arguments that convince people that Scotland should be an independent country. That should be our agenda within all the difficulties that are faced by the UK. And people in Ireland and the north of Ireland will take their own decisions. But fundamentally, the United Kingdom is damaged by the impact of Brexit. And for Scotland, we've got to decide what's the best course for our country to take, and I think that's through independence.
You spoke today about a message of hope and optimism returning to those days in 2014 as you saw them. But in actual fact, you know, the last few years for the SNP have been some of the most turbulent that they've ever seen. There have been high-profile splits. There's been anger around gender reforms, for instance, not least to mention the case of the ongoing police investigation into party finances. So isn't that optimism and positivity quite a hard sell?
I don't think so, because look, we've just had a party conference. That's a gathering of our party members around the country. And I think people came together at that party conference with a real resolution to move on and to give the leadership to Scotland that we need to give. And that's what I'm all about. That's why I'm leader of the SNP today. That's why I'm the First Minister of Scotland, to give that clear, emphatic, trusted leadership to the people of the Scottish National Party and the people of Scotland. And I think my party is coming in right behind me to make sure that's the case.
OK, well, we shall have to leave it there, but thank you very much for your time tonight, First Minister. Thank you. Well, as much as the independence referendum revolved around political campaigns, it was a decision to be made by the people. For some, it was easy, but for others, it wasn't a clear choice. Often that dynamic existed not just between party rivals, but within families and friends. Our reporter Louise Cowie has been speaking to some in Dundee.
It was historically the home of jute, jam and journalism. Later, the city of discovery. In 2014, Dundee became Scotland's Yes City.
Yes, 53,620. No, 39,880.
A lot has changed since the majority of Dundonians gave the thumbs up to independence. For one thing, the city boasts a dramatically different skyline. But what about its political landscape? I took the temperature at Lifegate, which serves up free food to dozens of families every week.
I didn't vote because I had people in my ear saying vote yeah, vote yeah, vote yeah, and then I had other people in my other ear going vote no, vote no, vote no. I still wouldn't vote. It causes a lot of arguments, and it splits communities apart. Whereas we need communities to work together.
Like all my political views, most people's political views all come directly from their family and their parents, so it normally just falls in tie with, oh, we're of this family, so we vote for this. I still think I would vote yes, because it's something that a lot of people have been fighting for their whole lives. And I think that every other country has had its chance, and Scotland should get its chance as well.
A few miles away, and dominoes are on the cards at the Boomerang Community Centre. Like the pieces, the players are still very much divided over independence.
No, it was the right decision. Yeah. Well, you take it now in Dundee. If people come to vote again now, Dundee win the vote. Yes, they win.
Personally, I thought the country's in a bad enough state. Could it get any worse? It was my personal opinion. I thought it can't get any worse. Why not try and give Scotland a chance? Because you don't know unless you try. Sometimes you've got to be brave, and that's why I thought. That's why I voted yes. I don't go back to 10 years ago. Well, you voted no, it's your fault. You know, what's the point? You know, it's just everyone to their opinion, and that's the way I see it.
I had to believe that UK as a whole nation, Scotland in a whole UK would be a better decision, so that all our children can have a good education, and you feel quite secure. I've kind of regret it now. If we would have voted yes, that would have been different. Scotland, more independent, and would have more power. Maybe can do more better for everybody.
The voting age was lowered to 16 in Scotland before the independence referendum. These Dundee University politics students were still too young to vote, but it loomed large in their lives.
The main thing I can remember really is division between everyone in the country. There was a lot of conflicting arguments on both sides.
I remember my parents getting really worried about it, and then I was getting worried about it, but I didn't really understand what it was that I was getting worried about.
I was actually living in England at the time of the referendum, and I remember following really closely what was happening here, and it really was what got me interested in politics in general, and I've sort of never looked back really.
But what about when talk does turn to the future?
When we're in classes, I think it takes maybe about 5 or 10 minutes for independence to come up. It's always been present, and it is going to be present for a long time. We've got a government in control who, in Holyrood, who the main mandate is to make us independent Scotland.
I would be really worried about Scotland's future if we were to leave the United Kingdom. I would say we would have more of a chance of survival if we were part of something like the European Union, but even then we're such a small state that I don't think it's worth it to leave.
Everyone's got a different opinion on the matter, and I'd say it's still very relevant, particularly here in Dundee, the Yes City as it's called.
Louise Cowie there with the thoughts of people in Dundee. Now, needless to say, a lot has happened since this day in 2014. 6 Prime Ministers, 4 First Ministers and Brexit, to name but a few. Our political correspondent Glenn Campbell now takes a look back at some of the key events which started with the vote a decade ago.
The date of the independence referendum was not just set in stone, but forged in steel.
As you can hear,
it was the SNP's victory in the 2011 election that kick-started the process.
First Minister of the first majority government at Holyrood.
Winning a majority in the Scottish Parliament gave the party the mandate for a vote to decide Scotland's future. The Edinburgh Agreement with the UK government paved the way for a Section 30 order, temporarily transferring the powers to Holyrood to hold a referendum, and allowing the Scottish Government to choose the question: should Scotland be an independent country?
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.
I believe in showing respect, and this is the right outcome for Scotland and for the United Kingdom, to give the people the choice. But I passionately hope and believe that they will vote to keep the United Kingdom together.
I believe we'll win it by setting out a positive vision for a better future for our country, both economically and crucially also socially.
Those who supported independence backed the Yes campaign. The unionist parties who opposed it joined the Better Together campaign to persuade people to vote no thanks. There was huge public engagement, a grassroots campaign filled with enthusiasm. But with passions running high, division was sown too.
Jim Murphy had eggs thrown at him in Fife yesterday. He said his recent meetings have been disrupted by what he called noisy nationalist mobs.
Plans were scrutinised and televised debates.
If we leave the United Kingdom, we leave the pound. What is your plan B if you don't get a currency union? This is most important.
It doesn't do anything to create real jobs in this country.
You're going to give to Scotland. What are they?
I've told you.
In Scotland, referendum campaigning intensifies as a new poll suggests for the first time a majority in favour of leaving the UK.
A late surge in support for independence prompted Westminster politicians to come north of the border.
This is your imperial masters!
The welcome they received providing one of the lighter moments of the campaign. A promise of more powers followed. When it came to the vote, the people decided to remain in the UK by 55% to 45%.
After 307 years of union, at the very first time of asking, the people of Scotland have turned down the offer of independence and voted to remain part of the United Kingdom.
That prompted the then First Minister Alex Salmond to resign.
For me as leader, my time is nearly over. But for Scotland, the campaign continues and the dream shall never die.
The SNP was riding high in the opinion polls. Nicola Sturgeon like a rock star, playing to huge arenas. At the subsequent general election, the constitutional split played to its advantage, and it won all but 3 of Scotland's 59 seats. More tax and welfare powers followed. The Brexit referendum changed things too. While the UK as a whole voted to leave, Scotland voted to remain in the EU. It brought renewed vigour and urgency to the independence movement.
As things stand, Scotland faces the prospect of being taken out of the EU against our will. I regard that as democratically unacceptable.
But the Scottish Government's calls for another referendum fell on deaf ears.
I say now is not the time, and the reason I say that is because all our energies should be being put into the negotiations with the European Union to make sure that we get the right deal.
The electorate had begun to tire of constitutional issues, and the SNP lost Westminster seats in 2017, though it was able to win some back when Boris Johnson came to power. In 2020, COVID hit. The Prime Minister's reign in Downing Street contrasted with Nicola Sturgeon's handling of the pandemic. Independence planning was put on hold, but popular support grew, despite furlough payments funded by the Treasury. Meanwhile, the former First Minister Alex Salmond walked free from court after being cleared of sexual assault charges. A parliamentary inquiry into the government's handling of harassment complaints against him dominated the headlines. He would go on to set up a new pro-independence party.
Today, I'm announcing the public launch of a new political force, the Alba Party.
The death of the Queen shook the nation. She had urged Scots to think carefully about the future. Would the Union be weaker without her? After the 2021 election between the SNP and the Greens, there was once again a majority in the Scottish Parliament in favour of another referendum. The Supreme Court was asked to rule on whether the Scottish Government had the power to hold a vote without UK Government approval. It decided it didn't.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
Plan B was to use the next election as a de facto referendum.
Winning independence is the cause I have dedicated a lifetime to. It is a cause I believe in with every fibre of my being.
But first Nicola Sturgeon and then Humza Yousaf resigned as First Minister. The SNP, plagued by controversies over police inquiries, ferries and gender reforms, suffered at the ballot box. 10 years on from the independence referendum, the SNP is still in power, but polls suggest more people would say yes to the policy than the party. That is one of the challenges John Swinney faces.
Kirsten Campbell with a trip down memory lane there. Well, that is all from us here in Holyrood just now. We'll be back later in the programme with interviews with some of the key players in the referendum, Nicola Sturgeon and Ruth Davidson. But for now, it's over to Graham Stewart in the Reporting Scotland studio. Graham.
Well, Laura, one big event which preceded the independence referendum 10 years ago was the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. And it was announced yesterday that the Games are returning to Glasgow in 2026 in a new scaled-back version. But what do those who live in the city want to see this time round? Well, our sports news correspondent Chris McLaughlin has been finding out.
The physical reminders of what happened in 2014 are all across Glasgow. Here in the east end of the city, there was a huge regeneration project, including the building of the Athletes' Village, which of course is now housing. So with Glasgow 2026 looming, what can the legacy there be? There will be no huge grand building projects, but if this is to be Glasgow's Games, what do the people of Glasgow want to see?
More tourists, money for the country, yeah. I remember the last time and it was just the buzz about the city. It was great. Everybody was just like all came together. So it'll be nice to have that kind of atmosphere again.
What would you like to see the city get from hosting again?
Just the tourism, and obviously it's just good for Glasgow, for the people and the community, the spirit and things like that. It's really good for when things come to Glasgow.
I guess as a father, what I'd love to get out of it is renewed engagement and enthusiasm in sport and a healthy, active lifestyle. I work for the NHS. It would be amazing to see some of the challenges that we see in the NHS being addressed.
So maybe a public health legacy?
Yeah, indeed. Perfectly put. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Fill that bucket up to the top.
So as the work starts, so too the questions about legacy for the next generation. A sporting event, yes, but Glasgow expects more. Chris McLaughlin, reporting Scotland.
Now, some of the day's other stories. A pedestrian who died after a collision on the M6 near Carlisle has been named by police as 22-year-old John Burns from Glasgow. It's understood that the Celtic fan had boarded the wrong bus following the game with Hearts in Glasgow on Saturday. Celtic fan pages have called on supporters to hold a minute's applause during their game against Slovan Bratislava in the Champions League tonight, as he was due to turn 23. The First Minister has warned that the early release of prisoners has not solved the problem of overcrowding in prisons. Under questioning from Holyrood's committee conveners, John Swinney admitted that the government is exploring alternatives to custody as part of the strategic look at the high levels of incarceration in Scotland. Prisoner numbers are over capacity, despite the early release of more than 450 offenders over the summer. Scottish comedian Jenny Godley has cancelled her autumn UK tour amid ongoing treatment for ovarian cancer. The 63-year-old was due to embark on the Why Is She Still Here tour before her doctors advised her to stop working for the foreseeable future. In a video posted on social media, she apologised to those who'd bought tickets. Now, Lewis is here with tonight's sport. Big night for Celtic.
I would say huge night game indeed, yes. Thank you very much. Hello there. Celtic get their Champions League campaign underway in just around an hour's time when they take on Slovan Bratislava, a team that were seeded below Celtic in pot 4 for the draw. It's the first of a guaranteed 8 games for Brendan Rodgers' side in the revamped competition. Ahead of kick-off, I spoke to former Celtic keeper Pat Bonner from outside Celtic Park, who believes the club has what it takes to get through to the knockout phase.
Yeah, well, they'll never have a better opportunity. You know, 3 points tonight against probably one of the weaker teams in their group in front of this fans out here. And they've been playing well, but, you know, European football is always a bit of a test, and it's a great test for the players, great test for the management. I think Brendan is very confident that this time round that he can make an impact. So 3 points would be a beautiful start.
Well, you touched on that confidence from Brendan Rodgers there, Pat. He said that it's maybe the best he's felt going into a Champions League campaign as a manager. Do you think that both he and the squad are equipped to succeed in this new format of the Champions League?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they've got enough firepower, especially against this team. Maybe there'll be bigger tests coming along, but against this team, they've got enough firepower to control probably the game and they will play their normal game. But in Europe, I've always said it for many, many years, even when I played, it's what you do in a defensive manner is really crucial. And I know this team will be set up a bit like their international team, very good defensive, and they will hit Celtic on the counter-attack, and that's where Celtic will have to be strong. They'll have to defend well behind the ball. They call it rest defence in Europe, and if they do that properly, the rest of it will take care of itself. I expect them, and I hope with the home games that they have and the group that they're in, that they will be in that top, whether it's, I'm not sure about the top 8, but certainly in the top 24, and they will continue in the tournament, even in the playoffs.
And let's take a look at how Brendan Rodgers has set his side up for tonight. No changes from their 2-0 win over Hearts at the weekend. Record signing Arnie Engels keeps his place in the midfield ahead of that defensive that hasn't conceded a single goal in the league yet. It's the first taste of Champions League football in a Celtic shirt for goalkeeper Kasper Schmeichel. The likes of Adam Ida, Paulo Bernardo and James Forrest ready to make an impact from the bench. And now Andy Murray has been putting in plenty of hours on the golf course since retiring, very jealous, from tennis after the Olympics. And today he stepped it up a notch, taking part in the Pro-Am with fellow Scot Robert McIntyre ahead of the PGA Championship at Wentworth. Our reporter Brian McLaughlin was watching on.
First up, make some noise for Andy Murray!
Back on grass, but it's a golf course rather than a tennis court for Sir Andy Murray as he tees off in the Pro-Am day at the PGA Championship at Wentworth. And he says although the nerves were a bit different, they were certainly there on the first tee.
Yeah, I was pretty nervous. I mean, I couldn't really feel my arms and legs. I didn't really hit many balls on the range beforehand, so I was feeling it, but it got better.
Murray has set himself a target of becoming a scratch handicapper in the next couple of years, and he's already a member of Dunblane. How often then can we expect to see him back in Scotland?
But yeah, there's obviously so many amazing courses up in Scotland that, I look forward to getting to play on some of them.
Playing alongside Murray were cricketer Jimmy Anderson, Strictly star Anton de Beek and Scotland's #1 Bob McIntyre, who was glowing in his praise of Murray's swing.
He was good. I mean, I know he's been practising a lot. Got a mutual friend that kind of keeps me up to date of what was going on there in the lead up to this. But I thought his game was good, and I enjoyed it.
For Sir Andy Murray, the golf this week anyway is over, but for the pros, the real business gets underway tomorrow morning when the flagship event on the European Tour gets underway, the PGA Championship. Brian McLaughlin for Reporting Scotland at Wentworth.
Boxing now, and Josh Taylor says he still has ambitions to become a two-time world champion as he enters what he called the final chapter of his career. Taylor, who was back at his old school in East Lothian to chat to pupils about his career, is coming off back-to-back defeats to Teofimo Lopez and Jack Catterall, but he insists he still has big fights to come.
There's a lot of talent that have moved up from lightweight that are making the division exciting again. So yeah, be in the mix with these guys as well and become a world champion again. You know, and if that happens, happy days. You know, I've become a two-time world champion, and then I can retire a happy man. You know, I can retire a happy man now, but I've still got a lot of ambition and I've still got a lot of drive left in the sport to achieve more.
So yeah, big night. That's the sport, Graham.
Great, thank you, Lewis. Now, we will return to Laura at Holyrood in just a moment. But first, the other big news story of the day, which has been the gorgeous weather forecast.
Glorious day of, felt like summer actually today, didn't it? Lots of sunshine, light winds, warm as well. Thank you very much indeed, Graham. Very good evening to you. Yes, we've had a pretty decent day of weather across many parts of the country today, haven't we? 19 degrees here in Orkney, but some parts of the Highlands into the mid-20s, 25 degrees for Kinlochew and Aviemore, all thanks to high pressure which is situated overhead and sticking with us for the next couple of days. However, its shape starting to change, so perhaps not quite as much sunshine and warmth tomorrow. But before we get there, let's talk about this evening. Lots of evening sunshine around. It's still dry. There'll be clear skies overnight. Bit of mist and fog forming and some low cloud around some eastern coasts. Temperatures in towns and cities 6 to 9 Celsius. In the countryside, a touch cooler. So first thing tomorrow, and like this morning, there will be some mist and fog patches around. Those should lift. The cloud and low cloud towards the east coast burning back to the coast, but then lingering in a few spots through the day. Same too, bit of low cloud drifting in towards Lewis and Harris and at times across Orkney and Shetland. But elsewhere, it's a dry, sunny and in places warm day. In the west, 20 to 22 Celsius, the odd spot reaching 23. In the east, a bit of a breeze off the North Sea, so cooler here, certainly where any of that cloud holds towards the coast. The northwest coast, the Hebrides and the Northern Isles, pretty decent sunny afternoon for you, perhaps not quite the warmth that we had today. Tomorrow evening, some evening sunshine, then once again that cloud drifting its way westwards inland, coming right through the central belt, and again some low cloud in towards the North Minch there. And that means on Friday an east-west split, so in the east that cloud holding on, quite stubborn at times, overcast Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen. In the west, that's where the best of the sunshine will be, but you can see some of that cloud will push through the central belt and in places it will hold on. Looking ahead towards this weekend, high pressure departs, low pressure tries to arrive, doesn't quite make it. That means we're in between two systems. So it's not too bad this weekend. There'll be some cloud building and temperatures by Sunday back down to the seasonal average for the time of year. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, welcome back to Holyrood, where it is a beautiful day, but chilly in the shade though. But outside this Parliament, there's currently a pro-independence rally taking place to coincide with this date, the 10th anniversary of the independence referendum. Our political correspondent, David Wallace-Lockhart, is there for us. David, what's happening then?
Well, Laura, the organisers just gave the 5-minute warning for the event starting. Some stragglers still coming in and joining the crowd. I have seen bigger crowds at pro-independence rallies over the past 10 years, but everyone here seems in good spirits. We heard some of the musicians warming up, playing Ode to Joy. I think a nod there at the anti-Brexit sentiment of many independence campaigners. And in many ways, the passion of these campaigners is a great strength of the independence movement. The people who will go to rallies, go to marches, who will look after stalls in town centres at the weekend. But the other element of that is an event like this is largely the Yes movement speaking to itself. Everyone here is pro-independence, would vote for independence, wants a second referendum. And we heard from John Swinney earlier reflecting on the fact that his job at the moment is to win around more people to the cause, to win over undecideds. And an event like this doesn't feel like it has many, if any, undecideds in attendance. That all being said, a big part of politics is keeping your base motivated, is keeping your most committed campaigners happy, their morale high. And I suppose an event like this and many similar events that we've seen over the past 10 years since the independence referendum is about exactly that. It's about keeping those campaigners motivated.
OK, David, thank you. Well, if a week is a long time in politics, a decade is an eternity. Much has changed in the intervening years since the independence referendum, not least the personnel at the top of public life. But at the time, there were key figures upon whose words momentum shifted. Our political editor, Glenn Campbell, has sat down with two of them to reflect on a moment of history. First, he spoke to the former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who was Deputy First Minister at the time.
It really was a special time in Scotland. I mean, of course, there are moments that I look back on and think if only, we'd done certain things differently, then it might not have made the definitive difference, but who knows, it might have made a bit of a difference. I think there were moments in the campaign, for example, the Westminster United Front against a currency union, for example, or, the disaster of the first televised leaders debate when, because these things didn't lead to a hemorrhaging of yes support, I think we comforted ourselves that they hadn't done us any real harm. Looking back, I think these were moments that probably slowed down what was quite a steady shift of opinion from soft no, undecided voters to the yes side. So I look back in all of these moments and there are many, many parts of that campaign I am and always will be intensely proud of. But there are moments of regret as well. How could there not be when the result didn't go the way I desperately wanted it to?
For those like you who still believe in, still campaign for independence, has the last 10 years been a wasted decade?
I fervently wish we'd made more progress, but I remain optimistic and as certain as it's possible to be about anything in life, and you can never be absolutely certain about anything, that Scotland will become an independent country. It doesn't feel right now that the independence campaign is perhaps motoring forward in the way that it might have been a few years ago, but I believe...
In fact, it feels the opposite, doesn't it? It feels it's on this line, no?
Actually, I don't think it does. I don't think the polling evidence would suggest that. It would suggest that it's pretty static. So I believe that, perhaps as part of a wider shake-up of UK governance, the reunification of Ireland, perhaps more autonomy in Wales, that I think we will see Scotland become an independent country. I'll certainly campaign and advocate for that for as long as I've got breath in my body.
Do you think the reunification of Ireland will come before independence?
How do I know? I mean, I'm not, I don't have the ability to see into the future. I think that will happen. It's not a matter for me, obviously, just as Scottish independence is not a matter for people in Ireland, but I do think that will happen. And I think we will see over the next number of years, I'm not going to sit here and put a figure on that, what I would describe as a very healthy realignment of how the nations of the British Isles are governed and cooperate together.
Did you squander your opportunity as party leader and First Minister to bring this about?
I reflect a lot on my time as First Minister and SNP leader, as you would expect me to. I didn't get everything right, far from it. It's ultimately for others to judge, not just in the sense of independence, but across my whole range of responsibilities, my time in office. But of course, I took the decision. It wasn't a decision that everybody agreed with in the wake of Brexit, that Scotland should have the right to choose whether it wanted to Brexit as part of the UK or to choose a different future.
And
Now,
is it correct that your Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, argued or warned that that might be the wrong way to go?
I think it would be wrong to overstate that, but John and I have had a close, strong relationship for many, many years.
But he's in charge now. Do you know, can you see what his plan is?
Look, I've got every confidence in John's ability to take forward the SNP and the independence movement. I was trying to answer your question about my time in office. I came up against a brick wall of Westminster democracy denial in refusing the right of the Scottish people to choose their own future. Do I wish I'd find a way around that? Yes, but that was the situation I faced.
The SNP has had its problems over the last few years. We're not going to talk about the police investigation into party finances because that's an ongoing issue. But to what extent has the cloud that and other problems have created held back the SNP and the push for independence?
Look, the SNP is a government now of 17 years standing. With any government of that longevity, there are going to be issues and challenges to overcome. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the SNP after that length of time in government, though, is the strength of support that it enjoys. And it's for those now in the leadership of the SNP, for those now in the privileged positions of ministerial office, to continue to deliver for Scotland, to continue to make the case for independence and ultimately to win that case.
Well, on the opposite side of the debate was Ruth Davidson, who at the time was the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. She has also been sharing her thoughts about that time.
I remember particularly close to the end, the last couple of weeks, there were some people within the campaign who got a bit edgy, or I might uncharitably say panicky. And I thought the move to kind of cancel Prime Minister's questions and have all the three leaders come up to Scotland was a bad one, and said so. And it looked, I thought to me, looked panicky. I also don't think it won us any votes particularly. But I guess everybody that just wanted to feel like they were doing something in the last couple of weeks.
The outcome is historical and it's a fact. But do you think that it gave David Cameron almost a false sense of confidence when it came to whether or not there should be a referendum on membership of the European Union?
I think that he should have learned lessons from the Scottish independence referendum that he didn't learn for Brexit, which was that you can't knock down false claims in 6 months. It took 18 months to really get people to focus on the big question marks that were unanswered.
We know that the independence referendum answered the question and did so in a way that nobody seriously doubted, but it didn't settle the issue. Why do you think that was the case?
I think, let me pick my words here quite carefully. I don't think anyone on our side of the argument expected the campaign for a second independence referendum to start the next morning after the first one. I think it had been so bruising and so divisive to the country that we assumed that there would be at least some kind of cessation of hostilities, at least some breathing space or gap or recovery time. And there just wasn't.
One of the reasons Nicola Sturgeon, the former SNP First Minister, says that there hasn't been another referendum on this is that she came up against a brick wall of democracy denial from UK governments. Do you think she's got a point?
I think Nicola Sturgeon talking about democracy denial in extent to independence referenda is laughable. She has never accepted the result of this in 2014. She has never publicly spoken or reached out to the no side, and there were people there that were, there were soft no's, they could have been converted. And I think the thing that really sticks out for me in the last 10 years was, I think she had a moment where, this could really have gone very differently, and that was in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit referendum, which Scotland hadn't voted for. And I remember her coming out on the morning after the Brexit vote, and actually they hadn't even stopped counting votes in some places, they were still going, saying, this is a material change in circumstances, Scotland now must have another independence referendum. And it allowed people like me who were staunch Remainers to say, look, don't say that my Remain vote was a vote for independence, because it wasn't. And I think that If she'd played a slightly longer game, and if she'd said, Brexit is so big and it's such a big challenge that I'm going to put party politics to one side for a moment, I'm going to try and work with the UK government, we need to salvage what we can from this. And then maybe 6 months down the line said, you know what, I can't work with these people. Scotland has another opportunity, it has a different choice. I think things could have been materially different. I think it would have been incredibly hard for people like me to kind of hold the line on that. And I think that she probably did have an opportunity. And her appetite to go so fast and so hard and so early took that opportunity away from her.
You might have accepted another independence referendum in those circumstances if she'd managed to break it.
I think I would have argued against it. I'm not sure whether I would have been able to take enough of the country with me for that. I mean, I think she would have had an awful lot of people that would have gone with her who, frankly, were turned off by the idea that she wanted to use Brexit to immediately jump to this other thing, rather than let anything settle or to try and work or, you know, or try and show a level of statesmanship beyond her own partisan interest and the interest that is her guiding light in politics.
Do you think that Scotland's place in the UK is now secure?
I think that people that want Scotland to remain part of the United Kingdom, myself included, need to make and remake that argument. And we need to make and remake it over and over again for every new generation of voters. But it's a choice, and it's a choice for people in Scotland. And, you know, we've got to make sure that people in Scotland can see the worth of that membership of the United Kingdom. And we can never take that for granted.
Ruth Davidson talking to Glenn Campbell there. Well, the referendum was about much more than the inner workings of this place. It brought a level of political engagement many had never seen before, with record turnout levels. At the forefront of this were young voters. It was the first time 16-year-olds had been enfranchised to vote. Our colleagues at BBC Scotland's The Social have been speaking to some of those who first had the opportunity to vote in 2014.
I think there was a lot of stigma around us young people as voters, and I think if anything that fueled myself and my friends to want to vote.
My name is Amy Jo Randalls and I lived in Angus at the time of the Scottish independence referendum.
My name is Rabia Sadiq and I am from Newton Mearns.
I'm Callum, I'm from the Isle of Skye.
During the Scottish independence referendum I voted no.
I ended up voting yes.
I didn't vote during the independence referendum.
I voted no because I felt that we were better together with a strong UK, and it felt silly to break away from that for what felt like just the sake of Scottish identity.
Free tuition fees, free prescriptions, so I remember there being talk of, you know, all of the free stuff that Scotland does get. It's only because, you know, we're part of the United Kingdom that we're able to do that. I'm glad that I did my research and was able to see that, no, an independent Scotland would be able to fund this.
I think seeing so many of like celebrities and Mick Jagger, David Bowie and stuff like that telling me not to vote for independent Scotland actually made it quite hard to engage with the Yes campaign.
When discussions were had at school or with friends, it was generally within the context of a class debate. Some of my friends were really staunch yes, some were really staunch no.
Having those conversations with people my age really helped me to actually make an informed decision, because we were all challenging each other and having debates in school, and it got everyone talking, and that's the way to make a decision essentially.
We didn't really discuss politics. I remember the odd teacher kind of maybe mocking the sort of Scottish Parliament and maybe mocking the sort of Yes campaign, but that's probably where my sort of apathy, you know, derived from.
The key issues that influenced my vote were mainly the concern of how uncertain the future might look. Currency with markets, with borders, and those were questions that felt pretty unanswered at the time.
There was a lot of sort of fear-mongering. You know, we wouldn't be able to afford this. Scotland relies on England for X, Y, Z.
A lot of people then who probably are all Yes voters now were just either, again, like me, apathetic, or were probably a bit like, no thanks, and that was the thing that people put on their Facebook profile photos, and I remember seeing that, and I think, look back now and I think it's a little bit cringe.
Since Brexit and since the pandemic, seeing how the British government handled those two different events and seeing how the overall attitudes of people around the UK have changed, I'd definitely say I'd be a yes voter today for independence.
Back in 2014 that, you know, an independent Scotland would be kicked out of the EU, and now 10 years later, what's happened?
Today I am a yes voter, although I do concede that I would only vote yes if the right conditions were in front of me. I wouldn't vote yes to what I thought was an uninclusive Scottish independent Scotland.
I think we definitely will see an argument for it come back Whether that's going to be in 5 years or 10 years, though, I'm not sure.
I would love for it to happen in 5 years for Scotland to become independent. I don't know if that's going to become a reality.
I think there should be a Scottish independence referendum in the next few years. I'm not super optimistic that there will be, but let's say in the next 5 years.
Some of the reflections of some young voters at the time, and that report was from the team at BBC Scotland's The Social, at BBC Scotland's The Social, which is at social media at bbc.co.uk/The Social. Well, for many journalists, the referendum was one of the biggest stories they'd ever covered, all of them with a ringside seat on history. And our political editor, Glenn Campbell, was at the heart of it all, and I'm very pleased to say that he is with me tonight. Glenn, in many ways, feels like a lifetime ago, but what are your reflections of that time?
Well, I think the thing I remember most is the energy in our politics at that time. Perhaps most obviously from the Yes side, because they were campaigning for this big change, but certainly more quietly and determinedly on the side of those who wanted to keep Scotland as part of the UK. And it wasn't really what was being said in Parliament or even by politicians that mattered. It was the conversations round dinner tables, on street corners, in the pubs where people were debating the future of Scotland, and that sense that this was a really big decision that really mattered. And of course the referendum itself realigned our politics and defined our politics for much of the decade that's come since then. And just one other sort of personal memory, 10 years ago today was the day I bought this tie.
I've been admiring it.
I bought it on the way to cover the results, and whilst that's a far less consequential decision than the one we were reporting on, happily the colours here matched the colours that the BBC chose for the yes and no sides.
I'm glad to see you've still got it, Glenn. But we know that the polls suggest that support for independence is still as it was there or thereabouts 10 years ago. How do parties move forward from that? How does that circle get squared?
It doesn't feel right now that there is much momentum in the campaign for another independence referendum, partly because of the divisions within the Yes movement. You had that big split between Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond, who now leads a party of his own. You also had that rift between First Minister Humza Yousaf and the Greens, and I think they feel pretty sore after being thrown out of the Scottish Government. And there are plenty of divisions within the SNP itself, which is the party of government here at Holyrood, has a lot of domestic problems in the delivery of public services to focus on as well. So it doesn't feel like in the next couple of years before the next Holyrood election this is going to rise to the top of the political agenda in that time. But as you say, there is still high levels of support for independence, and those who want Scotland to remain in the UK need to, as Ruth Davidson suggested, keep making the case for that, and to give people in Scotland a sense that it is worthwhile this nation remaining part of that union. And that might be quite hard for the Labour Party, having just taken over government across the UK, to demonstrate at a time when the finances are so stretched and they're going to have to make some pretty tough decisions. Their focus, therefore, is more on talking up the possibility of greater cooperation between the governments of the UK.
Well, Glenn, it's been a bit of a canter through the last 10 years, but I'm very glad you've joined me here for it. Thank you.
Nice to be here.
And just before we go, a reminder that Debate Night is back with a studio audience, putting questions to the former First Minister and leader of the Alpha Party, Alex Salmond, Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes, Deputy Scottish Labour leader Jackie Baillie, and former Scottish Conservative leader Jackson Carlaw. And that's on the Scotland Channel at 10:30 tonight. In the meantime, from Holyrood for the special edition of Reporting Scotland. Bye for now.